All right, today we are sitting down with Irvin Ramer in Elkton, Kentucky. We're sitting down with Mike Klein, myself, Brian Wood, and John Cameron, who works down here in Kentucky. And Irvin, before we get into some of the details of your farm and everything, you want to just introduce yourself, your family, what size farm you're on, and all that kind of stuff, and then we'll get into some of the background and what moving down here and everything.
Yeah, I'm Irvin Ramer. I got a 200-acre farm, milk 85 cows usually, jerseys, and a family of 11 children, 6 boys and 5 girls, and we're all family farm.
And you're not originally from this area, correct?
No, I'm from Pennsylvania originally.
Okay, and you're horse and buggy Mennonite. We've had actually on our podcast Mark Martin and Ernest Martin, so we've got a little bit of the. And you're of the same denomination.
I would be of the same denomination. Yes.
Okay, and they also moved from Pennsylvania, correct? But you came to a completely different area. What brought you to this area?
Well, I had one sister living down here, and I was looking for a farm, and farm prices were really high in Pennsylvania at that time. So that's kind of what brought me. And of course, I was always kind of adventurous in a way.
You'd have to be moving that far south, but just put some numbers to what was land prices at when you were looking to move, and then what were they at when you moved down here?
I'm not sure what the land prices were at that time, but I would guess them to be like $8,000 an acre in Pennsylvania at that time, which they're a lot higher now. But I bought my first farm down here for less than $1,000 an acre. So it was a big difference. I mean, it was.
How many acres was that first farm?
That first farm was 70 acres.
Okay.
And it was mostly hillside.
What part of Kentucky was that? Is that
it was about 10 miles from here.
Okay. And can you just kind of give us an idea of what kind of agriculture? I mean, we came from the Kentucky organic feed mill, and we saw that red dirt, and I saw as we were driving away from that area, and now we get into this area, we see a little bit darker soil, and it must change.
Yeah, it does change, and it's not drained as good as the red soil is, but it's not quite as droughty either, so it will hold its moisture longer. But if we have wet, it stays wet longer. We have an issue with mud over the wintertime.
Is it more of a clay soil?
It is a clay soil.
It's a clay soil.
Yeah.
Now, what year did you move down from Pennsylvania?
February of 2000.
Okay. And then you bought that farm, and then you bought this 200-acre farm where you are now when?
4 years later.
4 years later.
2004.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you were milking on the other farm as well?
Yeah, I was milking about between 30 and 40 cows, jerseys. And then me and Marlon Souter, I don't know if you remember Marlon Souter or not, but he was with Organic Valley. Well, he is again now.
He's in Colorado, right?
He's in Colorado now. And he lived on the farm that Glenn Zimmerman lives. So he got me started milking. I started as a greenhorn, so I had lots of bumps on the way. But so me and Marlon were the two that started talking about going organic. And Marlon was contacting Jim Wiedenberg a number of times until they finally came down to hold a meeting, see how much interest is in the area. And so there was a big crowd there at that first meeting, and they said, yep, they'll come. So me and Marlon started, and they didn't have much of a truckload. There was like 3 other people that signed up that came on shortly after. But they really stretched their neck out for us to get started down here.
What year was that?
That was in 2006.
Okay.
How many cows were you milking at that time?
At that time, I probably was increased to probably 50 cows.
And Marlin was?
Marlin was probably more like 80 to 90 cows.
Okay.
And a number of years later, he was up to like 130, and of course I increased too.
But the closest other farms would have been where? In Ohio?
When just me and Marlin
Yeah.
started? Southern Indiana.
So, Southern Indiana had
Yeah.
like Roger Garland?
Well, he came on in 2008, I think.
Okay. But in
Which-
that same area?
Yeah.
And did they put your milk on the same routes as them then?
Yeah, they did.
Wow, that's a haul.
It was a long haul. And there was like Bill Yu came on, and there was one came on that got off maybe a year after he was shipping or something. Actually, there was another one that came on too that didn't stay. I was trying to decide. There was a couple that came on, not right away, but shortly after.
Well, before we go too far into that, you said you came in 2000 as a greenhorn. I take it you were not milking in PA.
No, I got my dairy experience when I married.
Okay.
You married the herdsman?
Yeah.
So did you grow up on a dairy farm, your family?
No, I grew up on a beef cow operation, cow-calf. Well, actually, we finished the steers out, and we did grazing. We not intensive grazing, but rotational. Had a couple pasture, switched it back and forth. I really enjoyed being on the farm. I did have a job in a fabricating shop, welding shop, before I got married, and a little after I was married, but my interest was on the farm. And I told my wife that if we have a family of children, I want my children to grow up on a farm. And that was why I pursued to come farming again.
And were you thinking cow-calf beef, or were you thinking dairy when you
Well,
moved down
I
here?
thought a little bit about beef because that's what I knew, but I didn't think that it was going to be able to support the family. And that's why I went dairy.
Sure. And so grazing, did you start grazing right away?
I started grazing right away.
What was the influence of that? You know, that was
Well,
around the time when that wasn't as prevalent as...
That wasn't. But I knew a little bit about that. And it was... I couldn't imagine cows being locked in the barn all the time. So I was used to cows on pasture. And that was... It just was really what I desired, to see the cows out on pasture.
And was there a community of people that were grazing down here? Or did you... You came in as a true greenhorn.
I think Marlin was grazing at that time. I don't think there was hardly anybody else. But I had a brother in Indiana that was grazing too, so I had some support from him too. So,
because some of the Amish that live down here are from Lancaster, right?
Yeah,
like Menno,
yeah.
is it Menno Byler?
he's originally, well,
Is he Somerset?
he comes from Indiana.
Oh, he comes from Indiana. Okay, he came.
Yeah, but would originally come
Okay.
from Lancaster. I
So
think.
would those guys be more the tie stalls, high production herds?
Yes, they would.
Early on, because in talking to Melvin Troyer earlier today, he was talking about having yonis in his herd, and that's what got them to try to get the cows out on pasture and get them into the sunlight to try to help the cows be healthier and see if they couldn't control, which that was the first time I had ever heard of somebody getting into grazing because of a significant issue they were having, which I found really interesting. But it's the grazing aspect has really grown here since then, hasn't it?
Yeah. There's still some of the Amish that, because of their high production, they don't graze quite as much as they could, but they graze. They graze what they need to.
Now, are you seasonal?
I'm about 80% spring seasonal and 20 fall.
Okay.
And I used to be 100% seasonal, but then, I'm not sure which year it was that Organic Valley asked that we produce more milk in the wintertime.
So it was a market driver. It wasn't you wanting to do that. What was the thinking behind being seasonal in the first place?
It put all the calves in one group, and it's kind of natural for a grazer to make milk when got the grass growing. And it's a lot easier for me to maintain dry cows over the winter time than it is milk cows. So what I do normally is I stockpile fescue on my hillside ground, and I scatter hay bales, round bales, over the hillside. So it's bale grazing and stockpile both. All I do every day is go out there and move my fence and a hay ring, and I don't have to use any equipment to feed my dry cows.
So are you completely outwintered then?
Yeah, for the dry cows. Now the 20% that I milk during the winter will have access to the barn.
Okay.
But still have access to pasture both.
Sure.
Now, how long is your grazing season here? How many days do you figure?
Well, in a sense, I graze all year. From in March, I'll be grazing some. It really varies on the years. We have had really warm in February, but sometimes we have cold in March, yeah. But till April 1st, I can just about be full on grass. And then depends on if we have a dry fall. If not, then I can graze up in December, which my cows are still out on pasture grazing a fair amount of forages.
And what kind of grasses are that? And we're coming from, Ohio, Michigan area. Are you doing anything different as far as grass types compared to those guys?
I'm not sure what they're doing, but my focus is on all seasons. Have forages I like to have a forage at its prime as many parts of the season as I can. So I'll do some annuals. I will have annual ryegrass, which is early in the spring, and have some pre-annual ryegrass. Then I got fescue, clover, chicory mix that keeps going in the summertime, and I also do sorghum sedans and millets, and then I do some turnips and oats and for the fall, and then annual ryegrass again.
And you stockpile your fescue on the hillsides. Is that just native Kentucky 31, or do you reseed that?
I reseed my fescue wherever it's tillable, but on the steep hillsides, I try not to work with my soil would wash away if I'd done it. Yeah, that is Kentucky 31.
Which you can't kill.
Not very easy.
Well, to the guys that would be farming up north, that long grazing season from March through December, essentially 9-10 months of the year, sounds great, but the part that that you deal with a lot more is that midsummer heat.
The midsummer heat really puts a pressure on the, well, it puts heat stress on the cows, and milk production will go down from that.
And what kind of temperatures are we talking here, like in midsummer, or what are you dealing with? I know it's a range, but...
It is a range, but it will come up to 90 degrees and just... At night times, it'll cool down to in the 70s, but it's you know, it varies. It will get hotter than that, and it would, sometimes we have a little bit cooler than that too.
Mm-hmm. So what are you doing for heat stress? What are you doing to try and mitigate that issue?
I have woods that I put different lots in, and I let them out in the morning and for pasture, and then leave the gates open where they can come back in the woods with a water trough. Another thing is they will eat probably about 75% of their feed at nighttime when it's hot. So I feed them more at nighttime than in the morning.
Sure.
Do you try to use your sorghum sedans, your summer annuals during the hot times, or do you use those before or after?
I like to use them during the hot times, but I graze them at nighttime.
Okay.
Instead of during the day, because in the afternoons the sugar levels increase in the sorghum sedan grasses and will drop again in the morning. So I get the most value out of them at nighttime.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the mornings I'll go on to more of a clover mixed pasture, which I find that chicory is doing really good for summer heat too. And that seems to help with milk production.
Is good for summer heat in what way?
Well, it will grow. It got a long tap root.
I see.
So it will keep growing when it's dry and hot. And chicory got benefits of the parasite control, and also that they don't bloat as easy.
So when you plant your annual and your perennial ryegrass, you're looking to get the most bang out of that in the spring months.
Yeah.
It's probably by middle of June, that stuff is all headed out. And
even towards the beginning of June,
okay.
I'll be trying to work that down and preserve a little bit of moisture for my summer annual.
Okay. So you go into your ryegrass with the summer annual.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But that ryegrass will really make some good milk in the spring.
Oh yeah, it will.
But it's, even in our area, you would think, we're far enough north there in central Ohio, but I tell you what, once it gets hot and dry, it almost, if you have a straight seeding of ryegrass, it looks like somebody Rounduped it. I mean,
it'll go in seed head just like overnight.
Yeah, a couple of days of 80 degrees and boom, there's a seed head.
Yeah, it don't matter which height it is,
mm-hmm.
It'll go to seed head. Just all of
But
that.
when you can get it at the right stage, I mean, that makes unbelievable milk production.
I had annual ryegrass seeded this fall that did really good, and it was a foot high. It started to lay over a little bit, just at its prime. And I turned the cows in there, and I couldn't hardly feed them at the bung anymore. And I tried to make it reach for a number of feedings, so I had to feed at the bung a little bit to slow them down. But they ate about half what was at the bunk and stood at the gate bawling to get out.
Now, your annual ryegrass will overwinter here?
Yeah, it will.
It will?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we probably get, we'll overwinter some winters, but lots of times it
Okay.
won't.
Yeah, we can depend on that. It will overwinter.
Because you wouldn't get the really deep frosts during the winter, like the serious freeze, a foot deep or so.
No, we don't. I got water lines that are a foot underground along the cow lanes, and I don't have to worry about them freezing. But then we deal with more mud in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. We get just enough cold weather to freeze the water lines and not enough to freeze the ground solid, so we have mud and frozen water lines. It varies so much, though.
People would think that we could graze our milk cows in the wintertime and go fall seasonal, but normally the cow lanes would get so muddy and we'd be plugging out the pasture so much if they would be going back and forth from pasture to the barn because we have rainy, muddy weather in the wintertime.
Because I was actually thinking this would be very conducive to a fall season, but I did not think of the mud. And it's really easy, if you have muddy fields like that, you can just ruin a field.
And mud and let's say it's 35 degrees to 40 degrees and raining, that puts more stress on a cow than 20 degrees or 15 degrees, cold and dry.
Yeah, because if you just think about you working outside 20 degrees and sunny or 35 degrees and rainy, which one would you rather work in?
I would rather work in the sunny weather.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the veterinaries said that it takes, I forget, but I think it's like 20% more energy at 35 degrees and raining than it does at 20 degrees and dry.
Well, that cold rain, it's going to take a lot of energy because you are really losing body temperature because of that, because you're basically heating that water that is coming onto the cow up.
Yeah, it is.
That's hard on any animals, is that cold rain, especially if there's some wind to go with it. That's just brutal.
That's why deer got hollow hair.
Huddle hair.
Hollow
hair.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, their winter coat, the hair is hollow. It's for insulation, and it'll shed water.
Cows haven't been adapted to have hollow hair quite yet.
Not yet.
They've been pampered in the big freestall barns. Your cows might eventually come out with some hollow hair.
I look forward to that.
Either that or just start breeding your cows to deer.
There we go. I've had deer out there in the pasture with them, but I haven't seen a crossbred yet.
Probably milk production probably go down a little bit.
I'm afraid it would. Or then the deer would get bigger.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of deer in this area?
There's quite a bit, yeah.
But not so many that they're a problem?
The biggest problem would be when they're in rut, I have to fix fences all the time.
Oh,
That's probably it. And then if we get really cold in the wintertime, if they bunch together and 30 of them will come out in the ryegrass pasture, I guess they'll eat quite a bit,
But are they doing much damage to, are you growing a corn crop here?
No, I do not grow any corn.
Okay.
Except sweet corn.
Deer really like that.
Yeah.
But
we keep that close to the house.
That's a precious crop, right?
Yeah.
But with not growing any corn, so are you, the 200 acres here is all pasture, or are you?
It's about 50, close to 50 of it woodland.
Okay.
Some of that woodland I cleared out and have shaded pasture. I sowed grass in it, but it still got trees in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you're not growing any grain on the farm.
I'm not growing any grain on the farm.
But how much grain are you feeding the cows right now?
3 pounds. And I'm not buying any more grains. I'm trying to phase it out.
You are. So you're
Yeah.
going 100% grass-fed.
Yeah, I think I'm almost there.
Okay. And what have you seen as you tried to make that transition?
It's a big challenge to keep body condition. That's probably the biggest challenge. I can make milk, but I gotta watch that body condition. It takes high energy forages. And right now, I don't know if I should say this or not, but I'm milking once a day.
Okay.
And that really helps with body condition.
How long have you been doing that?
For about 2 months now.
And that's just because they're slowing down being late in lactation? Is that why?
Yeah, and experiment. The cows that freshen this fall, I'm doing the same thing and watching their milk production, see if it's any less than the year prior.
But so once a day milking is something you might go full time to?
I might go full time, just depend how it works out. Kind of an experiment.
I have 2 farmers that are once a day. And the one guy he's very successful, he lost like 20% of his milk the first year, but he said when they freshened the second time around and it was once a day from the start of the lactation, I think he said he was down like 12% from twice a day. And he said that 12%, he said if he figures his time for milking the second time, that 12% easily would have covered that. So he likes it because he milks at 5 o'clock in the morning. Then by 7 o'clock in the morning, he's done. And he said now he can focus on making high quality hay.
There we go. Yeah, that's kind of my goal. Why I did this at the time I did was to catch those fall calvers to start right at the beginning. I had one of them that I thought was just about bagged up too tight that I should milk her twice a day, but I didn't. And they seemed to hold their production really good. Now, the ones that were late lactation dropped quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But after I went on the ryegrass, they picked up too quite a bit, even at once a day milking.
And, back to grass milk along with that, you're currently not in an area that has a premium for grass milk. So what is the driving force behind going to 100% grass-fed? Just to cut out that grain expense, or?
It is partly to cut off that grain expense, but I kind of like challenges in a way.
You did say you're adventurous.
But also I'm hoping maybe sometime we'll get the market down here. But I want everything to be in place once the market comes.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And I know we've talked to a couple of the guys that are on the grass milk truck up in Central Ohio, and the most successful ones are the guys that have been doing it for many years prior, for 4 or 5 years prior to the actual premium coming to them. And so it sounds like you're setting yourself up for actual success and not just taking advantage of it when the premium rolls around.
I think if I figure my financials up, I don't make that much money on the grain that I was feeding. The biggest margin is on the dry matter of grass that the cows graze. So the larger amount of dry matter I can get in the cows that is grazed, the higher my margin should be. Now it's just going to depend on the volume of milk that they give me towards what they were before.
I think there's significant challenge with all grass, but if you go into it to try to really learn and see what works, I don't think there's a breed of cow that doesn't work, and I don't think there's a farmer that can't do it, but you have to be really aware of, like you said, body condition, you really have to monitor that, because I think you have to really be concerned about how much stress you're putting those cows under, because you don't have that tool of putting 3 pounds more grain out there if your forage quality's down. So
Yes.
the toolbox is a lot emptier than it is if you can feed grain. So the management side, I think it can be done very successfully, but it takes good management.
I think so too. The management part is a lot more intense, and I think you're gonna see a little bit more fluctuation as the weather than when you did if you're feeding a lot of grain.
Because your grain is a constant.
Yeah.
So if you're feeding 5 pounds of grain, that is a constant every day. It's the same. I mean, your quality of your grain can vary a teeny little bit, but not nearly like your pastures and your stored hay will.
Like if you have a week of rainy weather, cloudy rainy weather, quality of pasture energy is going to drop, and you can't put it back in if you're not feeding grain, unless you got it in your stored feed that you feed some of that.
A lot of guys in Ohio are feeding either sugar or molasses, and they are basically monitoring their pastures and watching the cows, and are putting that in once they see that you've got rain, a lot of rain, cloudy weather like we had in June this year. The cows were lacking energy. The pasture looked amazing, but it did not have the energy. So putting a couple pounds of sugar or a couple pounds of molasses back in really helps.
I thought about that a little bit, and I would like to do it without the sugar or molasses, but I'm not saying that I'm not going to add some if I need to. But if somebody's going to constantly feed molasses or sugar, I don't think they're gaining a whole lot over feeding grain. Unless it's just for the premium, of the grass milk.
I think the molasses and the sugar is a helpful tool for people to figure out how to make milk without it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because the guys that were feeding a couple
toolbox.
pounds of grain brought in the molasses or the sugar. While they were bringing the grain down, they started bringing in a little bit of molasses and sugar, so that transition for the cow was a lot smoother. So all of a sudden the grain was out, and they had the other constant that they introduced. But I don't think feeding a lot of sugar or molasses is a long-term strategy in grass milk. I don't think it should be.
Yeah, I don't think so either. For myself, I used to feed 6 to 7 pounds of grain, and I just over the last 2 years gradually stepped it down, and I had intentions of going 100% last year already, but I put it off to another year.
What was the reasoning behind that? Was it a tough forage year, or did you feel you just weren't quite ready to make that jump?
I seen a little bit that my body condition wasn't where it was needed to be, and I decided I need to figure this out a little bit better before I make the jump.
Was there a time of the year that the body condition was coming off the cows, or was it just you just were slowly seeing the lack of energy take some fat off them?
Well, it was till I went through the summer. In the springtime is always a challenge, especially with a fresh cow. She wants to make milk, and forages are lush, and you have to have something to slow the rumen down. Then if you don't build that up fast enough, you come into the heat and you won't gain any body condition there. Then if your forages are not good enough in the fall, you're going to go into the dry period with not enough body condition. And that's where it really hurts.
That's when the train wreck is going to happen.
Yeah. So I seen a little bit of that, and I decided I cannot do it right at this time. So I kept it up for another year, and now I'm going into the dry period, milking once a day for a couple months before they're dried off, and I can see body condition increasing quite a bit now already.
So was that one of the factors behind doing once a day milking, was to keep body
Yeah.
condition to set
It-
yourself up for next year?
Yeah, it
I
was.
see.
It
Okay.
was.
I think with getting a dry cow, putting body condition on a dry cow with grass is totally different than grain. Because if you build that body fat and that body condition on grass, you're not going to have the ketosis problem that you have if you're feeding too much grain.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've seen guys that a cow that the condition isn't where they want it for her to, she's still a month out from drying off. They're drying her off a month early, getting them dried off and running them with the other milk cows on great feed to get that body condition up. Because like Irvin Barkman said, he wants his dry cows fat on grass because especially the spring fresheners, because they'll come out of winter looking great. They'll hit that high protein. But what he does is he feeds the sorghum sedan silage in the TMR when they're on that lush pasture to try to help condition. But I've got 27 herds that I body scored that are grass milk. And by far, the cows coming out of winter look great. I was really surprised. Then they started losing some body condition during the spring, but the summer heat's when they really got hammered.
Yeah.
But then this fall, they came back really nicely. So I think we had a pasture walk this summer in August, and none of the farmers wanted a pasture walk in August.
That's a good time to do it.
No,
though.
because like Kevin Keno came in, and we were trying to help figure out what can we do during this summer slump. Okay, that's the fall will take care of itself. The winter, if you've got decent feed, will take care of itself. What can we do to figure out how to get this condition on the cows during the summer heat? And that's something that it's going to take a lot of work. But I think with supplementing some good high-energy forages during that time and managing heat stress, I think is going to be huge.
Yeah, I think so too. Eliminate as much stress as possible.
Now, you listed off a good list of species that you grow throughout the year. Did you mention alfalfa, or do you even try alfalfa?
I do have some alfalfa. Our soil is not quite so good for alfalfa because of being wet in the wintertime. But I do mix a little bit of alfalfa in. I still kind of lean more on the clovers. And clover is a must for me. I mean, that makes everything a lot better.
Well, that'll be interesting to watch the transition to 100% grass-fed, because, I guess one question that...
My grain is going to run out this winter. So the cows that freshen, my 80% of the cows that freshen this spring will freshen without grain.
Okay. And then the second level, one of the things we learned in talking to a couple of the guys that are doing 100% grass-fed up in Ohio, what are you doing with calves?
Calves, what I normally did was I let them run on their own mother. A number of years ago, I started with a nurse cow group. It worked okay, but after a while I decided I'm going to leave them on their own mothers. And I like that a lot better. Then I started creep feeding them, about a month old. Just had a creep feeder there by the parlor where the calves could eat some grain while I was milking. Then about 2.5 to 3 months I would wean them and feed them grain and hay and pasture. Now if I go 100% grass, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I kept some of my fall calves and feeding them milk, not on the cow but on bucket feeders, and good high quality hay, just to see how good I can do it. I'll probably keep milk there all winter long.
Well, and that's what we learned was that when you first switch off of grain, those cows have been used to grain for many years. And then the calves that are raised on no grain, once they come in, it seems like their rumen has, well, it's gotten used to your new management, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And then they come in and they freshen and they come in the milking herd, and all of a sudden production comes back. So that's why I was asking what you're looking at for calves. And
Yeah, I've heard that quite a bit, and I guess that's experiment to come yet.
mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm experimenting on this little. I got 6-7 calves, I think, from this fall that I'm experimenting with once.
At the organic farming conference in Ohio, there was a grass milk panel, and they talked about producing grass milk. It was Joe Langmeyer, Myron Martin, and who was the third? Amos Nolt. And so we had the session on the grass milk. It was really interesting. And then we had there was a session after that on raising grain-free calves.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting how all three of them started doing no grain to the calves with different ideas. And they all ended up basically doing it the same. They all came from three different ideas.
Well, what were their ideas?
Well, first of all, it was keeping on milk a lot longer, which they do. But they're weaning them, some of them are weaning them 4 to 5 months. And like Irvin Barkman is 5 to 6 months on milk. But it was really neat how they feel how important that is to be successful as a grass milk producer is having the calves all grass, no grain to the calves. Well, the new grass-fed standard is there won't be any grain to the calves after the 2-year sunset. And I know there was an uproar by quite a few farmers on that. But, these guys that have been doing it a long time, they're saying that's a key right there, is not getting the calves dependent on the grain.
I think, it would be.
But it's not going to be cheap. If you're having a calf on milk for 5 months, it's not cheap.
It's not cheap leaving a calf on its own mother either.
Because you're not controlling how much she's drinking either.
No, they get free choice, and once they're about 3 months old, cow come in the parlor with no milk.
There's one producer that's doing something kind of interesting. If he has a spring calf, once it's weaned, after they're weaned, they'll run with the dairy cows, like that fall, on the best pasture. And then he won't freshen them till 2.5 years old. So a spring calf will freshen in the fall, and a fall calf will freshen in the spring. So they're 2.5 years old. And those were the nicest springers I think I've ever seen. But he said it took him a long time to figure that out. He said he was not, when he pulled the grain from the calves, he was not giving them good enough feed once they were weaned. That's why when he weans them, if they're, the spring calves especially, run them with the dairy cows after they make sure they're not drinking anymore. But on the best pasture he has. And he said that, same with, and then the fall calves, which he doesn't keep that many of them, but they get the very best feed he has.
I usually run my heifers that are breeding age. I run them with a milk cow group. I really like that. But I didn't think about running with them half a year old.
Mm-hmm. But
one thing I would be concerned about would be sucking.
Yeah. He said you've got to be really, really sure that they are weaned before you do that.
Yeah.
Because he said once they get started again, you almost can't get them to stop.
Yeah. The three, do they bucket feed their calves, or do they use nurse cows?
Irvin uses a feeder with the nipples.
Well, yeah. A feeder.
I think I think they both do.
Okay.
Oh, you're talking on the panel.
Yeah, the ones on the panel.
I think they all bucket feed.
Okay.
I wasn't in for the whole thing. I'm pretty sure they bucket feed.
I like the idea of letting them with the cows, but if I need to feed them milk for a longer period of time, and I leave them with the cows, I might as well just put those cows in a different pasture and say, you're not going to be milked this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to have $2,000 worth of milk in the calf.
Because there's now an organic milk replacer available. And so one of the farmers said, well, he's going to see about switching to milk replacer on some of these calves and just feeding them for, 2 months more. Well, he did the math. It's the exact same price as feeding raw milk.
Is it? And it's soy based, isn't it? The milk replacer?
I don't think so.
No,
Okay.
it's dairy.
It's all dairy.
I believe so.
I think so. But he said if it's the same cost, a calf is going to do a lot better on whole milk than it is on milk
Oh, yeah.
replacer.
I think so, too.
I'm just excited because of the milk replacer option for somebody like me who just wants to raise some calves.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, that's going to be
there's at
nice.
least an option available now.
Yeah.
Well, Irvin, you're doing some trials out here with the University of Kentucky. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done out there and what you've seen that you like?
And these are forage trials.
Forage.
These are
trials.
forage trials for UK.
Okay.
And they don't have any information as far as organic research. So they asked a couple of us farmers if we'd be willing to do some plots. And we're also taking samples of the cows, monitoring their fat and their somatic cell counts, mastitis, and then forage dry matter and so forth, to put some information out that UK can put out for people. So I got these 4 different plots. The one's a cool season mix, fescue, orchard grass, clover, and alfalfa. Then there's one plot that's annual ryegrass and red clover, and we're experimenting at a bigger scale on that now, just because we think that might be something that's going to work good. We're trying to make it as a perennial system using annuals, putting red clover and annual ryegrass together, then kind of disturb it in the springtime and putting crabgrass and Lebzadiza in there with it. Try to keep the red clover there also. And then in the fall, go disturb the crabgrass when it's fading out and put annual ryegrass back into it.
Would this be with a no-till drill or?
Yeah, well, the crabgrass you couldn't do with no-till drill because it needs to be just about on the surface.
Okay.
You could go over with a chain harrow or something like that. I mean, mow the annual ryegrass down real short or then graze it real hard. Kind of stress it in that maybe towards the end of May or beginning of June when it's starting to mature. So it's going to phase out anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
And putting the crabgrass in there. Then in the fall, cut the crabgrass real short when it's getting mature, and then no-tilling the ryegrass into it. Then there was a mix of brassica, oats, and ryegrass that goes into sorghum sudan and cowpeas and crimson clover and ryegrass that goes into sorghum sudan and cowpeas. But we'll probably not go any further with those. We pretty much know how those are working. The crabgrass thing is just something we want to experiment a little bit further.
And this is just pasture. You're not cutting any of this for hay?
No, this is just pasture.
Okay.
And I take the pasture plate meter out there and measure it every time before I graze and
Oh, okay.
see how much dry matter's there and keep track of my grazings.
Do you have one of those electronic meters to test, or do you have to measure and write it all down?
I have to measure and write it all down.
Now, this is you and how many other Organic Valley producers?
The Bylers and Nathan, that would be 4 of us here in Kentucky, then there's 1 farmer in Tennessee that's doing it.
And I said University of Kentucky, but it's University of Kentucky and University of Tennessee.
Yeah,
correct?
they're both in it together.
And they're just looking for combinations of grasses that'll work for
Yeah.
organic dairy farms.
Yeah, they're just kind of doing the research and
How'd they what triggered them? I'm asking because it seems that the land grant universities especially are very tough to get to do that kind of research. And so what drove them to actually want to pursue that?
Ray Smith is our 4-H specialist. And I've been in touch with Ray Smith for a number of years just because of grazing. Jake Schmidt had a test plot here on my farm a number of years ago. We just did it for a certain length of time then. But anyhow, Ray Smith was out here to see it. He was very impressed with it. So then just a year ago or whenever it was a little over a year maybe, he decided to do this research and asked me if I wanted to partake of it. Yeah, I'll try it. He has grazing conferences and different meetings in the wintertime that I've met him a lot of. And he's been out on my farm a number of times.
It's pretty neat that they're actually taking an interest to see what they can do to, do research on organic farms. It's good to hear.
Yeah. I was for that, in that perspective, I was happy to. I mean, it's a little bit more work for me, but
I think it's interesting. Also, University of Kentucky doing research for organics is one thing, but also doing research for dairies. I mean, Kentucky is not a huge dairy state. We've got 650 or so dairies in the state, and that varies probably day to day. But we've got a lot of beef farmers out there. And I know Ray focuses pretty heavily on the beef farmer side of things.
When I first started to know Ray, he was pretty much focused all on beef. You didn't hear anything about dairy. And me and my brother's been working or had pasture walks with him and connections, and now he has a lot more dairy that he's included in his different conferences. And
Right.
I think we can wrap it up. Yeah, we just appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us and share a little bit, and hopefully we'll follow up again once you're 3 years down the road and 100% grass-fed and learned everything there is to know about it.
I probably won't learn everything, but
Gonna give it a shot though, right?
yeah,
And find your next adventure after that too. Or
that's the thing. About the time I learned something, I switch and go to something else.
But yeah, we appreciate you taking the time, and thank you very much.
Okay.